So Pauline, you can see that you're well placed here, given that the LibLab two-headed snake of war criminal activity is playing the propaganda in front of the whole country and not yet realising that it's embroiled in a legal scandal of great proportion. And thinks it can plod along like this, Pauline, without legal repercussions for the things that it's done over the last 15 years since Abbott was in power. You can see all of these people scrambling to the fold because they are, in fact, war criminals, Pauline. They can be fingered for war criminal offences in a RICO-style claim, and we use the word RICO knowing it's an American thing, but this is where they used a claim against gangs like the mobsters. Okay, so do we have a criminal mafia operating inside our government? Of course we do. Look at the subject matter that we're bringing up, Pauline. We're very well apparent that they're a criminal and war crime creating thug force within that parliament itself. We know what happened to you with the arrest and the going to jail, and you know yourself what these people are capable of at law. They've done this to me, they've done this to a few colleagues of mine, to the point where they searched his home again looking for a toy plastic gun, knowing that this would piss his family off. This is the kind of people you're dealing with, Pauline, when the New South Wales Police Commissioner takes it upon herself to use the Firearms Act over a toy gun to re-invade someone's home. This is the reality of the game that we're playing, Pauline. They fucked up royal. So royal that they walked into their own war crimes, Pauline. War crimes. You know, like Hague Convention style war crimes, Pauline. You know, like Milosevic style war crimes, Pauline, coming from people like John Howard and Tony Abbott over the years. Now Pell escaped the country with the hands of who? You know, and the ABC again lied about all of that, didn't they? They covered it up for the government. So is the ABC a propaganda arm for some sort of faction inside your government, Pauline? Because they seem to be continuously lying to all of the people, and the people aren't figuring out the reality of what's going on around them, are they? Are you able to speak about it, Pauline, or are you limited with your lips tied to your oath? Is this the reality of things within your criminal gang that you're mixed up with? Okay, and we know that you didn't commit war crimes. We know that these criminal men attacked you when you first tried to create One Nation. We know that there's a lot of things that most Australians don't see because they're plebs, aren't they, Pauline? They're just children waiting for the handouts and waiting for being told what to do all the time. They have no free will to be able to stand up and make claims of a godly nature. They don't have the ability to see what a foreign curial power might have done to them to make them subordinate at international law. They don't seem to realise that they've been dumbed down in the education systems of the states of this country to the point where they can't run an estate, Pauline. They can't execute their own affairs, Pauline. They can't stand up for themselves, Pauline. That's why you have this ASPI mob asking for a citizenship militia, which I'm pretty sure would be against United Nations laws, given that you're peacekeepers here. You can't raise the citizens up as a militia. I'm pretty sure that's against international law, given that we're prisoners of war in that respect. So I don't know how you mentally think within the auspices of government when you don't seem to realise that God laid down a stone that defined your Anzac in imperial law and in international law, and defines your right to administer under the Great Seal of Australia since 1973. It's why they kicked Gough Whitlam out, Pauline. It's probably why they kicked you out in the first place too, because you were questioning all of this stuff and you didn't really know anything about God, so you couldn't really question it. And you couldn't get up to the courtroom and say that you did know all of this stuff. And then you couldn't get someone else to go into that courtroom and define it at law and be accused by the New South Wales Police for believing in a delusion, right? And then going to the Supreme Court and having the Supreme Court define it as not an illusion and not a terrorist organisation, because it is in fact the naked owners of the Constitution that gives everyone the beneficial interest and pleasure of the Crown, Pauline, that you administer and cost them millions in their own wealth. Now, let's address something else while we're on this audio, Pauline, because we talked about profit apprendre, but we haven't talked about the people's assets. So at some point we're going to talk about the people's assets too. So what is Telstra, Pauline? Like we know that Telecom Australia still exists. We know that Telecom Australia is owned by the Australian Imperial Crown. We know that Telecom Australia still exists and the people don't have access to it. Who has access to our assets, Pauline? Is it Telstra? What is Telstra? Is that the privatisation of a company that's then given administrative rights over our assets for a revenue cost? Is that usufruct, Pauline? Is that what we call usufruct? When you create a new company to run our assets instead of letting our company run itself, Telecom Australia. And then here's the big con job, Pauline, because you conned all of Australians into this, into buying shares. Telstra 1, Telstra 2, Telstra 3 shares, right? And all these poor people, right, they bought into Telstra thinking that they were buying their own telecoms network that they already owned, because it was Telecom Australia that was handed to this Telstra mob in a privatisation. And then this Telstra mob sold shares in its administrative company back to Australians, Pauline. That's the biggest con job of all time. That's what we call a scam, fraud, a Ponzi scheme, Pauline, when you take the people's assets from them and then sell them shares in a company that manages their own assets and then lets that company sell them use of their own assets at a very high cost, Pauline, at a very high cost. And this not only applies to the phone network, does it? It applies to all the electricity networks. It applies to the rail network too, doesn't it, Pauline? These are all things that these administrators steal from us, rip us off. It's theft, Pauline, when they've been caught out at fraud. It's theft, Pauline, when they've been caught out as war criminals. And they think this is all going away, Pauline. They think they can just keep acting along like this international force that can break the law as it goes because it's got ultimate power. But it doesn't realise that God made up the law and they're supposed to uphold all of those international laws before the international world. Or they display to the international world that they don't follow the laws of the international world. Do they, Pauline? And this is a very stark reality of all of it, isn't it, Pauline? If you don't obey the United Nations and the right of self-determination, who are you? You're just warmongers. You're just a machine. Crunchy, stealing everyone's assets like you're doing in the Ukraine right now, aren't you, Elbow? Like you're doing with Australian assets right now, aren't you, Elbow? So, Pauline, we sort of get to this turnaround point now where you start to realise we're not talking shit, where you start to realise who you actually work for and that in the blessing of Almighty God, we have a stone of remembrance in a shrine of remembrance in a king's domain, Pauline, in a king's domain, that you and your government, through the auspices of Daniel Andrews and the Victorian police force, along with their fixated persons, decided to attack people on their holy ground, flying their own flags, Pauline. That's a war crime in itself, Pauline. Daniel Andrews, through the auspices of your government, committed another war crime. And these are the realities you have to come to, Pauline. These things aren't going to go away. These things aren't going to turn around. These things are actually coming forward for all of you. The reality of the people is waking up to all of it, and that should show you enough that there is foundations in God and the blessing of Almighty God, and a realization that they are all families that have a power over and above you as public servants, Isaiah 9:6. Right? We could also address Judges 2:12 in that you went whoring after other gods in your land instead of serving your own gods, Pauline. That's where we're at. Okay, so slappity slap, slap, slap time. That's a wake-up call for today, given you want to conscript the people into your Ukrainian battlefield bullshit wars and not let them defend their very own homelands for their very own stone and their very own crown alongside those Dreamtime Aborigine who had their very own sovereignty before you people arrived. There's a reality slap for you, Pauline. Slappity slap, slap, slap. Till next time. See ya.